Squint.
This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. I had a vivid dream last week that I was a policewoman chasing Finn Russell through the streets of Glasgow, trying to arrest him for an indecent magic trick that he'd been doing in the middle of the street. There was a bit where I tried to get into a tiny car as well. It was like only come up to my waist. And then right as I caught Finn Russell in the middle of a sewer, I woke up. It's a bit of a stretch of a metaphor, but as a Wales fan, that's kind of how this phase of the Wayne Pivac era is beginning to feel. It's an evocative dream that is nonetheless extremely mundane, yet follows a wild route of logic that only makes sense inside itself. It's a bizarre step sideways from the world we actually live in, and thankfully, it feels like everybody in Wales is finally on the border of waking up. Look, I'll level with you. These videos take quite a long time to make, and I do not know, as I am recording this, whether or not Wayne Pivac has been sacked by the time you are watching this. I don't know. There's a decent chance by now the memory of the last 3 years will be starting to fade away, the brain erasing what felt so real so recently for anybody who didn't keep a notebook beside the bed. Because Saturday's outing was perhaps the ultimate exercise in Pivacism. Wales playing with pace, power and beauty, but not really brains. The team putting in possibly their best performance from the 34 games in Takapuna's attempt to create a sentient octocube before throwing it all away in really spectacular fashion against an incredibly spirited Wallabies team who only had 4 fit players, who I promise I will get there and give credit to you as the video goes on. But in the meantime, it's time to look at how Wales did whatever the hell they did in those 80 minutes that led Australia to do whatever the hell they did in that last 15. Now, anybody who has been nodding off into Wayne's Wonderland the last few years probably noticed something different in the first 50 minutes on Saturday. Most notably, the fact that Wales were playing objectively well. No more need for jam. The attack that the former cop in the coach's box had been promising for years had finally arrived. It had finally clicked. So this begs the question, what changed? What did Wales do differently the entire rest of the era that made Wales work? Well, the answer is 20 years old, 5'6", born in Swansea and named Joe. For everyone who hasn't been tracking the development of every young Ospreys centre closely, and frankly, if you're not tracking the development of Kieran Williams, you're missing out on the most fun player in rugby, Joe Hawkins, for me, is probably the most exciting talent Wales have produced in quite a long time. Not content with being bigger than the entire Gorseidan area, Hawkins has spent large chunks of his age grade rugby path playing fly half. When captaining the Wales under-20s this summer, we even saw him kicking goals from halfway, and the addition of a second playmaker with a physical edge added an entirely new dimension to the Welsh attack on Saturday and allowed Wales to get their best out of their master play manager, Gareth Anscombe, for the first time in about 3 years. Now, I'm intending to do a deeper dive on what went wrong with Wayne's Wales in the next month or so and dissect the loss to Georgia there, but one of the key issues has been the second wave of the attack, this kind of zone here. This is just one example from the game against Georgia last week. Priestland is the only playmaker on the field, so finds himself having to organise both pods here, inside and outside him. He spots a small gap here, wanting to launch Carter into it, but with no link player in the boots, this space here, it becomes incredibly obvious what Wales are going to do. They could only crash this up. But without anyone also organising it and timing it properly, Carter has to slow down in order to stay behind Priestland, which means he's now running with less force. He's slowed himself down and into a Georgian who is now expecting him because the play is so obvious. This is the lead up to the try scored by Talupe Faletau, on the other hand. Wales get a great nudge on at the scrum, and instead of settling for the penalty, they choose to attack. Hawkins steams onto the ball, and because of his size, Donaldson becomes convinced it's a crash ball, why wouldn't you? So he sticks to him until the last moment. Hawkins' body language suggests he's at most tipping it onto North, but he times the ball out the back instead perfectly. His body language and the timing granting Anscombe all of the time in the world, and he uses just a second of that to wait for Dyer to get into a realistic position, meaning only Nwangeni Tawase has started tracking across. Adams gets well over the gain line, and Wales know it's only backs in this channel, so trust the two wingers to clear out and set shape. The Welsh pattern then is similar to the example used previously against Georgia, except Hawkins is able to play the Priestland role. Anscombe can then slot in as a result at first receiver, allowing him to scan the defence in the way the 9 cannot. Spotting the entire Australian front rower here, defending in midfield, having rushed into position after the scrum, he hits Alan Wynne-Jones in order to isolate Robertson here, who flicks it in behind to Hawkins. Alatoa does a brilliant job shutting him down, but Hawkins remains composed and overrides the plan, so just carries it in. Anscombe then does the same, and with the two playmakers on the ground, the natural third fly half, Adam Beard, steps in and barks for the ball, flicking it onto Cuthbert, excellently allowing Wales to cross the gain line and get to an edge again. This is where they set their best shape. And this is also where Hawkins really comes into his own. Where last week Priestland had to do everything himself, Hawkins here plays the number 10 role, managing this pod, allowing Anscombe to assess the defence wider. Not only is he in the boot, he calls Alan Wynne-Jones out from the initial grouping in order to wait on his shoulder, meaning any defender keeping an eye on him knows he has an extra option to hit. He can just send it into this forward instead, and it prompts Gleeson to fly up to try and hit Hawkins early. Except Thomas tips to Tipperick instead, who Gleeson is scarcely watching, and hence can spin out the tackle and bark forward. As the other Welsh players rush to clear out, Hawkins slides out and starts shouting. He tells 12-cap Lion, the most cap player of all time, Alan Wynne-Jones, to get out the way, knowing exactly the play he wants to run. The ancient deity then instead runs an inside line, and Hawkins hits Morgan on this line. He isn't fussed about the personnel at all, he just wants to hit this as wide as possible so he can tie Reece Hodge here inwards. Ikitau is on the far wing, having made a tackle earlier, and Hawkins knows if he can get Hodge to ground and out the picture, it's only the inexperienced winger over here covering half the width. Hodge, sure enough, steps in to help out, then Hawkins enters himself to clean. Where a George Ford or Paolo Garbisi would spot this multi-phase means of compressing a defence, they'd invariably then float around to complete the job and run the next phase themselves, but Hawkins goes, no, I trust Gareth Anscombe, a quick ball is more important. He makes a great clear out, and whilst Australia can fold free forwards around the corner, they're all on the inside of Anscombe, who, if we rewind, has taken over entirely, spotting exactly what his massive mate has done and knowing exactly what they need to do to take advantage. North holds his defender well here, but just keeps out of Adams' way at the same time, the makeshift fullback picking a brilliant line, drifting to isolate the defender then straightening to fix them, allowing Dyer to do exactly the same. His excellent quick hands putting the greatest play the world has ever seen over in the corner for a spectacular wingers finish. Felipe Faletau, man, I love him so much. And even when Anscombe is in full control of the tactics and organisation, in a team whose chief problems in attack have been the breakdown and how utterly predictable they are for the last few years, this makes such a difference. His sheer size draws Neville's eye, meaning when he drops it off to North, he's only running into one defender now, getting him over the gain line. Then Hawkins clears out alone, securing lightning quick ball. A phase or two later, he then shows up and shows some lovely hands, then secures the ball himself again. Wales then play simple crash at rugby for a few phases until Josh Adams, who had a quietly excellent game at fullback, by the way, spots something. He flies into Tipperick's boot last second, wrapping around to call it out and throws a very early ball to North, who's able to use his pace to draw but higher and put Dyer almost away. He very almost finishes this. Having two players now to do the boring stuff allows players like Adam, who have great rugby brains, to slot in and run things when they're on, to just take control when they have to, when they spot something, in a manner that simply hasn't been possible before. And speaking of bringing players onto the ball, this is just exceptional. This is Finn Russell at his best type stuff. Look at it, it's glorious. The sheer size of him means Australia have to front up and Gordon drifts to try and catch him, but as Australia commit, he turns his entire body to look at Anscombe. This has two effects. One, it opens up his ribcage to Gleeson. Any flanker presented with a chance to smash a debutant centre is going to take it, so Hawkins presents it. He just draws Gleeson into him. He makes himself bait, and his eyes focus on Anscombe, forces Hodge to only look at the 10, drifting out to mark the fly half, opening an even bigger gap for Jack Morgan, who hits a brilliant line once again. He had such a good game, Jack Morgan. Hawkins wants to get smashed because he knows it'll open up the space next to him. It's remarkable stuff from a debutant, and that's Morgan, who was, just brilliant. Just saying it again, I don't talk about his try here, but it's very nicely taken. Alan Wynne-Jones, what a player, basically the best to battle for contact and make it up to the 22. Back to the original point. Hawkins made his Ospreys debut aged 18, so him and Anscombe have been training together now for 2 years. They play for the same club and have clearly built up a real trust and partnership. But it's not a partnership built blind, for it all came about when they headed together to Squarespace. Too young to know an internet before social media, Anscombe went to try and show Hawkins how janky the old internet was back when you had to go and use websites. Remember websites? That's when Gareth Anscombe realised it is impossible to make a bad website on Squarespace, no matter how inexperienced you are, no matter how intimidated you are by the thought of HTML, no matter how young or old, no matter what you're trying to make the website about. Squarespace's easy-to-use tools make creating a beautiful website so easy that it's impossible not to do it. Anscombe couldn't help but make wonderful looking websites, and every time he did, how the two of them laughed. And if you have a colleague at work that you want to bond with over forming a really classy site, even if just by accident, please click the link in the description and use the offer code SQUIDRUGBY to save some money. That website-inspired link-up did not exist with Rhys Priestland once he came onto the pitch to take over. The first two phases here are a mess, so it's fair enough that Wales aren't exactly in the best attacking shape possible, but when Priestland calls the ball out here, suddenly the second wave is nowhere to be seen. Hawkins is way out of shot. The whole attack incredibly now predictable. North is starting here way too close, and the only way way he could have made his line he's running any more obvious is if he inceptioned it into Samu's dreams the night before. Best case scenario is Tipuric gets smashed 10 metres backwards. Worst case scenario, Pete Samu makes the intercept that results in a yellow card for the Welsh captain who trips him up, and a kick for the corner puts Australia in the position to score a try from exploiting the exact position Tipuric would have been in near the edge of this line out, but on the inside of Morgan, acting as the guard on the small, which proves to be the try that presents Australia with the mountain momentum they need to go on and win the game that Wales never should have let slip. But, that's just the worst case scenario. It wasn't quite a perfect performance from Hawkins. There's still odd moments like this, making a defensive read a split second late and allowing Ikitau to get on his icky outside, but for a 20-year-old centre on his first cap, it was pretty outstanding, especially considering the performance he got out of Gareth Anscombe, who was his absolute best on Saturday. After Australia halt this maul, they invite Dyer onto the carry, and Anscombe enters game management mode and just remains incredibly patient, which is one of his greatest attributes. After a few carries like this, Anscombe evidently has utter faith in what Wales are doing, which is a feeling nobody not called Wayne has had for about 3 years, and continues to call for varied carries off 9 instead of pick and goes and drives for the line. He never gives in or calls for the ball himself, instead ordering a set of forwards here, looking to generate quick ball. That happens, the space is there, but instead of trying to throw the ball, Anscombe wants one more phase to make sure. Donaldson here is forced to make the tackle, and these players can no longer drift out to eat up the space. By the time any Australians work around to help out Pataya on his own out here, the ball is out and Anscombe can fix Hodge, and spot Pataya has eyes on Hawkins, so throws the perfect pass to Dyer instead to score his second try of the series. It's just really, really calm, patient, observant work by Gareth Anscombe. And it's actually a very similar patience to that displayed by Noel Olaseo, fresh off the bench for the try that started the Wallaby resurgence. It all begins with a kick. So used to Tom Wright, the most NRL man to ever live, doing mental shit nobody asked for, Tate McDermott just stands in his way and points to the sky. And wouldn't you know it, Wright not only listens but hangs an absolute beauty. Wales have left some dead space in the backfield, and Adams has to fire in miles to cover it, and he flies slightly too far. Noticing this, Wright doesn't even compete because he knows Adams is going to miss the ball. Samu gets a toe to it, and Wales are suddenly under real pressure and have to ask the 35-year-old Rhys Priestland to do his best Roman Untermack impression, and that goes about as well as anyone would expect from that situation. Wales conceding a scrum 5, but still being a sovereign nation, so, it's not that bad. And off the back, the Wallabies play patient instead of going all out. Pataya disguises himself behind the scrum and then fires at the last available second like a bullet wearing Groucho glasses into Priestland and Hardy's lengthy faces. Hardy does a frankly unbelievable job here of slowing it down, buying time for the Welsh forwards to get into position, but the Wallabies don't change the plan at all. They're not worried by the slow ball here. Samu crashes straight into Hawkins, and whilst the centre makes great contact, the clear up by Ted Flanagan is excellent, and the Aussie ball is still super ultra mega fast. Lolaseo screams for another carry and then points at North, so Robertson obliges, bludgeoning into the other centre, and Lolaseo now knows it's time to go. Wales play a defensive system that utilises the scrum half as a third centre, and Australia have played 3 phases, each of them a bigger man launching himself at one of those 3 players, and it leaves this picture. North is on the floor, and Hardy has been filling in this position here before Hawkins got back up to his feet, meaning on the side where the Wallabies are actually attacking, tight head Dylan Lewis is the player playing 13. Lolaseo glances around repeatedly and then runs at him as well. Wright's line forces Adams inwards as Lolaseo releases it out the back to Ikitau wrapping around. Now, Josh Adams does about as well as humanly possible in this situation, not buying Wright's line and drifting onto Ikitau trying to double job, but because it's a prop inside him, he has to slow his line speed initially to match him, which gives Big Boy Len the time he needs to unleash Nwanga Nitawase. If one of the centres is in position here instead, Wales drift and cover this, but as it is, Nwanga Nitawase can catch Alex Cuthbert ball watching a bit and slip outside him for an unbelievable finish, man. The goal here is for Lolaseo to just get their most dangerous player into a one-on-one situation with his opposite number, and not only does he do that incredibly smartly, just check the way that Nwanga Nitawase checks himself to slow Cuthbert's momentum and then accelerates back into the corner. It's phenomenal. It's a frankly kind of just unreal finish. He's extremely good, guys. But as dangerous as the young winger is, it was the kicking game that got Australia back on top. Ikitau here spots Adams is about 2 metres out of position and figures he can at least get a bounce, which he manages, meaning Adams has to then rush his kick and puts it out on the full, whilst here McDermott is set to make a box kick, but the Welsh players have started to drop back into the backfield, leaving Alan Wynne-Jones defending the 13 channel. Lolaseo spots this and calls it out, and whilst Jones and Faletau do a frankly excellent job to save Wales' blushes, which is a sentence we've said a lot in the last 10 years, it leaves Wales short on the blind side, and McDermott, who was phenomenal off the bench, gives us one of his best beats of the game, calling the 1-2 to McWright, putting himself clean through before stabbing through this kick excellently. Hawkins has somehow miraculously just got himself back, but isn't given the time to kick, and the scrum eventually grants Australia the position from which they get to the maul, from which Elias does the yellow card offence, from which they get the penalty try that puts the Wallabies back within 7. And sure enough, the eventual winning try also comes from the Wallabies absolutely slaughtering. Like, this is like Roman gladiator, like murdering, like Rob Howley levels of slaughtering here on Wales in a kicking duel. The key thing in a battle like this is to be kicking on the front foot, to be the team controlling the battle, leaving the other team just kicking defensively, just clearing the balls fired at them. A bit like a defensive rally in tennis when one player is very much putting it into the corners and the other one's just struggling to try and get it back. And the Wallabies start here on the best terms, especially considering Wales have chosen to take winger Alex Cuthbert off to get a hooker back on the field for the sake of the scrum, with Elias in the sin bin. Once again, it's Ikitau who starts it all. He's such a smart rugby player and just turns Josh Adams, forcing the fullback into a full pirouette before he can kick it back just wherever he can. He's got no time to really aim much. This grants Loliseo so much time to just eye stuff up on his reply. Wales have only 2 players in the backfield here, Dyer and Priestland, who's covering the other wing. So he hits it like this, forcing Priestland to come in field and cover huge amounts of ground to get there before he looks up and sees the Australian backfield is almost impossibly well covered. Priestland decides to just look long, knowing nothing clever is on. He can't do anything except kick to them, and it pulls him up from the wing. Just as Campbell catches the ball, Nwanga points this out in the corner. He points out Priestland's come out of position. He's left the chase. And with Cuthbert off, Wales have nobody covering the far touchline. Kieran Hardy drops back last second and does an excellent job to field a great kick by Campbell, but the Welsh defence is now enormously out of shape. Hawkins is covering the wing, Dyer's at fullback, and auxiliary centre Hardy is on the wing, as well as playing scrum half. And having been on the front foot this entire battle, Wright now figures this is the chance to attack that disorganised the Welsh enough. He has 20 metres to run into, he slips past his man and crosses the gain line. Australia play a couple of phases in field to compress the Welsh defence. The forwards who've been running back and forth for like a minute here are all starting to get knackered. The wide play is on, but McDermott snipes instead. He ties in 2 extra Welsh forwards, leaving them extremely narrow when the ball does come out. Australia go down the line, but after being manipulated by the kicking game, Dyer has to sprint across from the far wing, where he's covering, and can't get into line in time, creating this huge dogleg. We're talking like Clifford levels big dogleg for Nwanga to exploit. McDermott runs a brilliant support line, but McWright's in the way, so Nwanga goes himself initially, then threads the ball over the top. McLeod makes a brilliant tackle in the end, but McDermott pops it up for a third Mac in succession McWright to keep it going. It means McDermott is on his feet to slot in a scrum half for the next phase, because Wales have had no time to organise. They've just been worried about getting back on side. It's only the forwards who were set defending this type phase earlier who've now jogged back and are watching the wide channels, and Kieran Hardy still playing wing. Ken Owens does actually a really great job in the 13 channel to buy Hardy some time, and you know what, I also think him going for the all or nothing option of the intercept might be the best decision he could have made, because if that pass gets to Samu, he's not stopping both him and the man outside him. But as it is, the pass doesn't get to Samu, but that doesn't stop anything either. The ball falls into Lonergan's arms, and he eats up the 15 metres and sails over for a truly remarkable try to cap off an unbelievable performance. All of this inspired by the Wallabies getting completely on top in the kicking game in the last 20 minutes. It's literally all that decided the game. Much as a lot should rightly be read into the absolute state of my dreams, this was truly a game that taught us everything about these two teams. Results under Dave Rennie might have been up and down, but there has not been one game where the side have lacked for effort, for fight, or for belief. They may not be everyone's favourite team to watch in the way some of the Wallaby teams Quade Cooper's played in the past were, but they have become one of my absolute favourites to cheer for because of the sheer sweat they're all showing. This 5-test tour has been one of the toughest a test team has ever embarked on. The 2 top teams in the world, the most improved test side in the game who have a real point to prove and can afford to target that game, and away matches at 2 grounds where the Wallabies have pretty bad recent records. And so, to end it like that, whilst one injury away from the toy on the touchline being deployed at tight head, is incredible. The results may have been up and down, but Dave Rennie has created a team worth believing in, and a team who should rightly dream of what may come if they can beat this same opponent in Lyon next year. Because if they can, a path to the final suddenly opens itself up. For Wales, however, this was less a dream and more a wake-up call that showed us exactly who they are. Wales are not a bad team. They're a good team who have a lot of fundamental flaws. Flaws that have been there for 3 years. But what Saturday taught us was that even when those flaws are fixed, there's just so many of them that you're going to lose a pretty solid number of your test matches against Tier 1 teams anyway. It's a situation that's becoming a waking nightmare for Wayne Pivac, who by now might already be back to his days as a Takapuna cop, reluctantly chasing naughty boy outside halves through the streets, knowing they were headed for the sewers, and hoping, much like the Welsh public, to wake up and realise the last 18 months have all been one very evocative, yet all too mundane, dream. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. All of the usual stuff. But I wanted to say as well that I wanted to really dedicate this video in particular to Joel Staite, who passed away a few months ago. Now, Joel was a big sports fan of all kinds, but particularly rugby, and particularly loved Wales against Australia and loved the games in Cardiff, loves visiting, as you can see here, him with his wife, again quite recently. He passed away just over a month or so ago from a rare form of kidney cancer, and his wife, Kiernan, was due to be doing a fundraising run with him in March. He completed an Ironman while still recovering from cancer. It's genuinely just amazing story. If you want to go and read some of the stuff, I'm going to leave in the description beneath. And as such, now, because Joel can't, his dad's going to fill in and do the fundraiser with her. And so I wanted to share that and, as I say, dedicate the video. I hope some of you watching are able to donate. Obviously, it's a weird and tricky time at the minute, financially for a lot of us. I just want to say, yeah, all the best, and thoughts continue to be with Joel's friends and family and all that knew him. And just want to send love on behalf of not just Wales, but the rugby community as well, and just say thank you for being a part of us.